Hi, welcome back to our lesson. Today's lesson is on Jamestown and Plymouth. We talked about in our last lesson exploration and some of the motivations for exploration. Today, we're going to talk about why countries are going to establish colonies. Um, uh, and we are going to start off with this question: why have colonies? The big reason, once countries establish themselves in different places around the world, they're going to begin to see the benefits of um, uh, those places. I'm talking about natural resources, finding gold. As we're going to see in the Jamestown colony, the importance of cash crops like tobacco. So they're going to see a return on their money. And this is going to bring in this policy that countries are going to follow called mercantilism. All right. And that's going to be one of our vocab words. And basically, the simplest way to put this policy is that a country must sell more goods than it buys. So to even break it down even more, if I was had a job at Wendy's, I love Wendy's. But if I had a job at Wendy's, I'd be eating so much Wendy's that I probably wouldn't make anything. I'd be spending all of my money eating their food. All right. The point of making money is to, sell goods. So, if you're selling candy and you're eating more candy than you're selling, you're not making a lot of money. So this is a policy that countries are going to follow, and it's basically saying to keep a good, favorable balance of trade, to sell more goods to other countries than you buy. But in order to sell more goods, right, you need to have those goods, have those exotic goods that other countries want, like spices, like exotic fabrics and foods. The main point for mercantilism is to sell more goods than you buy. You want to make money. So why have colonies? Another reason, all right, they didn't just want their natural resources. People living in those colonies also are going to buy goods, right? So now not only do you have a market to sell the goods that you provide in your homeland, but you also have another exotic location where you can sell goods from that location in your homeland. So it kind of works both ways. So this wasn't cheap. Joint stock companies, um, uh, were created to pay for the long, establishing a colony. All right, you needed to pay people to, um, uh, sail there, navigate there. You needed to pay people to live there. All right, so a common way for people to raise funds was to create these companies. Right now, think about it. If you have a great idea, but you need a lot of money to start out, and you're taking a pretty big risk by yourself. But if you get a lot of people and you convince them that this idea is good and to chip in a little bit of money, all right, instead of spending $10,000 by myself and losing that money if my idea fails, if I get 10 people to give me $1,000, it's a lot less detrimental to them. All right. People can withstand losing a little bit of money, but once you start talking about a whole chunk of money, then people really, are going to think twice about making that. Joint stock companies allowed investors to pay a share of the costs. That way, all right, there's less risk for them involved. So the first colony that we're going to see established is Roanoke. All right. Roanoke, we're not going to spend too much time on. All right. But the main ideas that you need from Roanoke is that it was the first attempt at a colony. It was not successful. So in 1587, 100 men, women, and children settled Roanoke under the leadership of John White. White had a granddaughter named Virginia Dare that was born there. And soon after she was baptized, John White returned to England to gather more supplies. So it took him a long time to get back. And when he got back, there was nobody there. Historians debate on really what happened. Major consensus now is that these people probably left and went to live with Native Americans, that they were struggling so bad they couldn't make it on their own. They could have been killed by the natives, who weren't particularly friendly in that area. So a lot of different theories have gone, even, the theory of they just disappeared. So the main thing I want you to get out of Roanoke, that it was the first attempt, but it failed. All right, that's the main point. I will say that again at the end and right now. It was the first attempt at establishing a colony, but it failed. Jamestown, all right, and I want you guys to write this down. Jamestown is the first successful colony. All right. And it was very hard for them to do it. The Virginia Company of London, a joint stock company, um, uh, sent, I want to say, 150 settlers. And out of 150, only 38 survived the first winter. All right. They barely hung on. All right. Sorry for my clock there, but 38 of 158 50 settlers is not a lot. A lot of them starved the first winter. They were there to find gold. That was the reason why they established Jamestown. They wanted to find gold in the New World, and they really picked a poor place. That's going to be important to know. All right, the settlement was on a swamp, and when you settle in a swampy area, you get a lot of mosquitoes. The gentlemen refused to work at first. They didn't bring enough laborers. So, these men that were rich and wealthy that wanted to, strike it rich or strike it even richer in the New World weren't used to working with their hands. And on top of that, the winter was bad and the Native Americans were not friendly at all. However, John Smith emerged as a leader, all right, and he declared that those who wouldn't work wouldn't eat. And this established a little bit more of a rule of law, all right, that if you weren't going to put in the work, then you weren't going to survive. So things got real bad. All right. They were going to leave, and then they were saved, and somebody returned to Jamestown with supplies. The thing that saved Jamestown was the cultivation of tobacco. All right, having cash crops. So John Rolfe and Pocahontas. All right, you guys probably know Pocahontas from the Disney movie, and think that Pocahontas and John Smith had this love affair. It was really her and John Rolfe who got married. They grew tobacco and experimented with it. They were able to cure the tobacco and sell it for profit. And it was a hit in Europe. People couldn't get enough of it, and Virginia, ended up growing gold. All right, they were the richest colony in America during this time. So it was very labor intensive, right? Um, uh, they mainly used, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, indentured servants. All right, but they wanted to utilize this land. All right, they offered land to people to come settle, and a lot of people that brought people over, as we're going to talk about later when we talk about southern colonies as a whole, kind of gave them incentives, and it's kind of like a reward. If you bring so many people over here, we'll give you so much land. But you needed people to work that land, and the first group of people, the first group of laborers that cultivated tobacco were indentured servants. All right. I know we probably think of the main labor force at this time as slaves, but for a brief period of time before they started importing African slaves into the colonies, people used this, indentured servitude to kind of trade their labor and their services in order to get free passage to the New World. So, along with indentured servitude, you signed a contract. All right. And this contract basically said that you pledged so many years of your service in exchange for food, shelter, passage to the new colony. Um, uh, and most people who were indentured servants died before they ever saw their freedom. Um, uh, you couldn't get married. It was almost like you were a watered down slave, if I could describe it in a way. All right. In 1619, so about 15 years after the settlement, all right, the first enslaved Africans were brought to Jamestown, and this is going to replace indentured servitude. All right. Indentured servitude will phase out after this, and slavery will be the more um, uh, uh, efficient way to provide a labor force at this time. Excuse me. All right. So, moving on, Massachusetts. All right. The Plymouth colony is what we're going to talk about right here. And you guys might have heard them because, all right, they were settled by the Pilgrims. All right. So, those of you who are familiar with the tale of, our first Thanksgiving where the Pilgrims sat there and had a dinner and after their main harvest and enjoyed their, Thanksgiving dinner with the Wampanoag Indians. So the Pilgrims were separatists. They were there. They established the colony for different reasons than Jamestown. All right. And as you guys are going to do in your assignment, you guys are kind of going to compare and contrast the colonies, where they located, their type of government, um, uh, why they were there, a bunch of different things. So pilgrims were called separatists. The main reason why they left England to establish a colony was to separate from the Church of England. All right. So they really they weren't against the Church of England. More so, they wanted to purify the Church of England. They saw the money that they thought had corrupted the church. They saw these, big cathedrals with these stained glass windows. These choirs singing in church. They wanted to simplify the church purely to to what the Bible said. All right. So the Pilgrims started the Plymouth colony. As you can see, a beautiful picture of this beach in Cape Cod. All right. They set sail with 100 passengers aboard the Mayflower. All right. And they ended up deciding they wanted to settle in Virginia. They weren't the best navigators. They ended up to decide to um, what they thought was Virginia, or a little bit north of Virginia, and they were completely wrong. They were way north. I don't think they expected that they would be that north because their first winter was pretty hard. Um, uh, so they're going to establish themselves in Cape Cod, Plymouth Rock. So the area they settled was very good, much better than what Jamestown had decided to settle on. And the Native Americans were friendly. All right. The Mayflower Compact is important. I want you guys to write this down in your notes. And I want you guys to write down that the Mayflower Compact established government in the Plymouth colony. All right. And it basically was just saying that a majority of the men in that colony would vote and decide the laws and rules. All right. Squanto is going to be the Native American that really helps the Plymouth colony. He's taken back. He learns to speak English and he's brought back home. And that is where he's able to kind of, communicate between the natives and the pilgrims. All right. So they did struggle, even though I want to say they were a little bit more successful than the Jamestown colony. The Pilgrims were very hardworking people. All right. Therefore, they didn't really have trouble like they had in Jamestown, where the gentlemen weren't willing to put in the work. Um, uh, so they also had help from the Native Americans. They showed them how to grow crops and be successful on their own. And in the fall of 1621, they celebrate what we know as Thanksgiving. All right. So I just want to go over a few main points before we end. All right. Just to summarize, countries established themselves to make money. Some began out of a need to freely practice their religion. It was incredibly difficult, and many people died. Many people died of starvation. Many people died of disease. It was not very easy to do. So, another thing I want you guys to keep in mind, the three colonies that we talked about today: the Roanoke colony, the Jamestown colony, and the Plymouth colony. All right. What you need to remember about the Roanoke colony: it was the first attempt at a colony, but it failed. All right. What you need to know about Jamestown is that it was a success, even though it almost failed. Tobacco and the cultivation of tobacco ended up saving Jamestown. They had a lot of trouble because they settled in a poor location. A lot of the gentlemen weren't willing to put in the work. And John Smith ended up stepping up as a leader and kind of, putting down his foot and said, if you're not willing to work, then you're not going to eat. The Plymouth colony, these colonists, established a colony in search of religious freedom. They picked a good location. They had friendly natives. But even though they had friendly natives, still half of the settlers that went there died in the first winter. So, that's those are some of the main points. I want you guys to, really think about how difficult what they did was. All right. So I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.